This is the story of the good ship Trilleen and my attempts to become a better sailor, living with the after effect of spinal injury and mental health difficulties. Join me on passage and as I work to refit Trilleen, a Vancouver 27 from 1979. Good morning and welcome to the good ship Trilleen. Storm Arwen passed through last night and we are still here, so this is very good. And I had a decent night's sleep. The most common thing I see people waking up to on boats is the question, where's my coffee? As a disabled sailor, there are some questions that come before that, like, what state's my incontinence pad in? These are the things that people don't talk about, but actually they're what enable me to go sailing. And I think it's really important that on this channel I talk about the things that distinguish disabled sailing from normal sailing, and so I'm going to be doing a lot more about that in the coming videos. Today the plan is to sail down to Lymington, and the reason I'm doing that today, I try very hard to make sure that every trip I do has got some training value attached to it. So the plan for today is to sail down to Lymington. It's only about 10 miles away down the river towards the Needles. And I'm doing it because I want to practice disembarking and setting up my wheelchair with its new powered attachment. The passage to Lymington should have been quite bouncy, with a northwesterly 15 to 20 knots blowing in, just the aftermath of the big storm. But in fact it turned into a bit of a drift, with maybe 5 to 7 knots of wind by the end. So my choice to put in one reef was not looking very wise, but I have a sort of aversion to taking a reef out just before sunset, because sunset does funny things to winds and it gets dark and you never know quite what's going to come. So I just concentrated on getting the best out of Trilleen as she drifted down the Salem. That was made a bit more difficult because I was counting on a bit of oomph in the wind to carry me against the last of the tide, the east going tide. So it was a slow trip and a good opportunity to try out the cold weather clothing and see how that worked out. The answer is it worked out relatively well, and I'm pleased with some neoprene socks that fitted underneath my splints and don't seem to have done my feet any great harm. So that's a win from my point of view. And it was a really pretty sunset, so very much worthwhile, even though I got into Lymington when it was well gone dark, which of course means about 5 o'clock these days. Good morning. We are assembling the tri-ride to go for a bit of a bimble round Lymington and Keyhaven. This was one of the reasons why I came down to Lymington today, was to actually trial this process, because there's nothing like doing it for real to find out where the snags are in any process really. I had dry assembled the trike before at Cowes Grimfian, but it's always best to actually try these things in the wild, because you never quite know what you've forgotten until you try it. I'm incredibly grateful to Safford Services charity, who broker grants from many other specialist forces charities, and they part funded this tri-ride. Without their help, its purchase would have been greatly delayed, and I already know that it's going to be a key part of my equipment as I sail around Britain to talk about accessibility and improving access for disabled sailors to the water. So it's stupidly cold this morning, and I figured that I probably needed some insulation on my legs, because otherwise I'm going to freeze myself stupid. One of the great pleasures of sailing is to be able to go for a walk off the boat in a new place, or in my case a wheel walk. And this tri-ride, which I've just taken delivery of thanks to Safa, is really enabling me to do that for the first time, and it's an enormous amount of fun, and I'm hoping that it will be an enormous amount of fun in a lot of new places. Disabled sailors face all kinds of issues. So here I am at Salisbury District Hospital. In fact, today I'm not at the spinal unit, rather I'm going to visit the orthotics department to get a test on my new orthotics, which I've been getting used to. I think that they probably need a little bit of adjustment because they're marking my skin in a couple of areas. We have to arrange all sorts of stuff around our sailing. It's not just getting out there and getting wet and then having nice coffees on shore, but there's medical stuff to organise, operations, appointments, more operations and more appointments. That's generally how it goes anyway. It turned out that despite the best efforts of the lovely orthotics team at Salisbury, the AFO, that's the smaller of one of my splints, wasn't quite right, and in fact was rubbing quite badly. So after getting some permission, I took the Dremel to it very, very carefully and ground out a bit more. In fact, there was pretty much enough space there, but what needed doing was it smoothing off completely. So I finished that job off with some wet and dry sandpaper, which I strategically entirely failed to film properly, as you can see here. And so far, the splint seems to be doing all right. The real test will come when I put it into a sonar and get it wet, and we'll see what happens. I'm sorry I've been a little bit absent on YouTube. I know some of you rely on watching this to keep up with what I'm doing. In part that's been because I really wanted to think carefully about what I use this channel for. But the other side of it is that I have been in the process of moving onto the boat in earnest, and it's hard, it's difficult work, and it's especially difficult accommodating my disability. So there's been a lot of stuff that just hasn't been very interesting and frankly has taken a lot of effort. This is the first video that I produced that's actually been shot and edited wholly on the boat. So I'm hopeful that that's a good sign. YouTube really likes you to release videos regularly, so I don't think it's going to really like me. But I think that initially I will try to release a video fortnightly, and we will see where we go from there on in. Some of it might not be very interesting, but I promise that it will be about me and about what it's like trying to become a bit more of a better sailor while living with the disabilities that I do live with.